to bring in Mack now. Let's see what Mike's doing here. And here he comes. Oh, look at him. Look at him. There he is. Connecting his audio. Mack.
Hey, Rick, how are you?
Welcome to the war room here, you know.
Is that what this is?
Yeah, we had a small enough group where we just decided just to stay together and talk a little bit about what they were reading and watching this last week. And in fact, maybe you want to chime in here on some of your thoughts on this, because you're an expert. Small group network, is that right? You founded the small group network?
Yeah, I founded smallgroups.com. This is a little weird, but I found smallgroups.com. We called it the small group network at the time. And then smallgroups.com is still going. And now the small group network, which is, that's basically
Steve Gladen.
Yeah, Steve Gladen and all those guys out of Saddleback. And I was a part of that group later on as well. But yeah, that's my background.
Well, one of the things that their big question this week was, what kind of group is most appealing to you personally? You know, we've talked a little bit about open groups and closed groups, and we were just talking about sermon alignments or sermon studies that go along with, you know, where all the groups study the same thing of what the preacher or the pastor was speaking on. I'm kind of curious what you would answer to that question. What groups are most appealing to you?
Different groups for different times of my life. And I think that's a big thing, because a lot of this stuff is all factored on personal, like where you are and where your people are if you're doing small groups. So when I was brand new Christian, I was in a group of people about my age, and they just helped me. It was an open group, met every week, like on a Tuesday night or something. And they just helped me learn what being a Christian was all about. Mm-hmm. We did Bible study, but mostly we were a community. Mm-hmm. So when I got married, my wife and I got into a young couples group, which was unbelievably helpful for us and for the whole group. That was one of the best groups I've ever been in, because that was truly a group that did life together. I mean, like, if you defined what doing life together was, I use that for all my illustrations, that group. And then I think over the last several years, the best groups that I've been a part of have been men's groups, where there's been more accountability, more, they were kind of closed groups. They were open by invitation. Like we kept it open to invite others in, but we would let everybody know, hey, I want to invite my buddy in. This group would be great for him, kind of a thing. We didn't open it up for anybody from the church.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So it was a closed group.
It was more or less closed.
Yeah.
But actually, we're adding people all the time.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
There's those clicks again.
Yeah, we got into a conversation on clicks, you know, and you know, my argument on clicks is that if you have a community, you're going to have clicks. You know, the bigger a community get, you're going to have natural clicks because people click, you know, together. But that doesn't have to be a negative. We often look at clicks as being negative, when in reality, clicks just happen. And obviously, if they become very selfish and inward focused instead of outward focused, then you can see where that clique has walls around it, and that creates barriers, and that's a problem, right? But let me introduce Mike to you all here, just so you're aware of who you've got on the line here. This guy is top dog. He's just an amazing guy. I ran into him a few years ago when he took over as the editor of the Christian Standard, which is something I've written for a long time, and I just you know, over the past few years, we've just kind of become friends, and I think we think a lot alike, which is scary, Mike. It really is. You know, how we think about how the church should operate and how what community looks like and all that. But I really, when I think about this class and I think about kicking off this series, we've got some great people coming in here this time, but I can't think of a better person than Mike here to kick us off. But Mike, you've written a few books yourself, but is there anything more? The big thing is you're the editor of Christian Standard right now. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself so the students here can get a better view of you.
Sure. Yeah. So I kind of started in ministry going for, I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a Christian writer. That's really all I wanted to be. I didn't really have any interest in being a minister in a church, kind of a thing, like paid staff. And my wife had no interest at all of being a preacher's wife. And so I kind of fell into it. I worked for Standard Publishing back in the day. I had written a few books on small groups and discipleship, and then churches started calling. And at first we just kept saying, no, that's not where we sense God's calling us. But eventually the tides sort of changed, and I felt like God was calling me into some sort of church leadership on staff. So after that, we were in a church in central Indiana, then Boise, Idaho, where Rick is, and then Louisville, Kentucky. And so I was doing that through 2012 and sort of wrote several books on the side during that time. And those books were practical in nature because I was just talking about what we were doing, the kind of ministry that we're doing in small groups and discipleship. And then kind of went out on my own and did some small group ministry stuff through Small Group Leadership, another website that I started. And in 2017, took on the role of editor of Christian Standard. Is that kind of...
That's great.
That's just my ministry career. We live in just outside of Louisville, Kentucky. Are you getting a lot of wind sound?
A little bit, but it's not bad.
Is it okay? All right. I'm outside, as you can tell. But yeah, so we live just outside of Louisville, Kentucky. We've got 4 kids, my wife Heidi and I, and they're all grown up. They're all in their 20s. 2 of them live in Louisville, and one lives in Lexington, and one lives in Utah.
Wow. Now, one of the things interesting, and Mike, don't have a lot of time, but you've actually kind of commandeered the Christian Standard magazine through a very interesting time because it's gone digital in the last couple of years, right? So it started out as a paper product, but now it's wholly digital.
Well, not wholly. I mean, we have our print magazine that we still do. We just went from monthly to every other month.
Okay. There we go.
But I tell you, the print magazine is very much worthwhile.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of people, even younger people, who like to pick up something in print and read it. Yeah. And what we've done is we made the magazine a superior product. Like, you want to hold it in your hands and read it. You don't want to throw it away when you're done with it. It's not the old throwaway papers you used to get in Sunday school.
Yeah.
So, and it's really nice, good photography and all that kind of stuff. But then we're doing a lot more digital now, particularly, and we're trying to, there's several reasons for that. First of all, with digital, we can be current. Whereas with the magazine, we're always lagging about 3 or 4 months behind with our production schedule. So we're really pushing out with news stories and stuff like that. Always looking for news stories for our website. And we've got like 4 different newsletters now as well that kind of go along with the website.
Yeah. Well, small groups, though, is still a passion for you, right?
It is. I'm not as involved as I once was. I'm not writing as much about it. I would say my passion has never really been small groups, though, although it seems like that. I started websites with small groups. I wrote books about small groups. I was a small groups minister, but my passion is really for discipling people.
Okay.
Reaching lost people and helping them grow in their relationship with Christ. I just happen that happens better in small groups than a lot of other ways.
So in a nutshell, how would you, what's your philosophy of small groups? In a nutshell, and then we'll open it up to the students here, see if they have any questions, but let's talk philosophy for a moment.
In a nutshell, that's hard.
That's a whole book, right?
I've written books on the philosophy of small groups. Yeah. So I would say my philosophy gets more toward the organic and less on the program. Um, I'm always going to go back to discipleship because that's what I believe it's really all about. So, I've said, and other people have said, small groups don't make disciples, right? Disciples make disciples. Mm-hmm. Sunday school classes don't make disciples. Sermons don't make disciples. Discipleship programs don't make disciples. Jim Peterson once said, 30 years of discipleship programs and we're still not making disciples. And he said that 30 years ago. So that's a big part of my philosophy. We have, whatever we do, whatever programs we're running, whatever small groups we're doing, whatever types of small groups we're doing, the first thing we have to be considering is how are we making disciples through disciples? Now, if that happens within a small group, that's fine. But you can't just set up a small group or a small group program and say, hey, we're going to be making disciples. Those two things aren't equal unless you are developing systematic ways of helping people grow in their relationship with Christ through relationships. So it's all relational.
What do you think, guys?
So when you say discipleship, sir, what do you mean by that? Like, how do you go through discipleship process? I mean, and the reason why I ask is because over the years, I've run across a number of individuals in Bible studies that say Bible studies is discipleship in of itself. But I disagree because Bible studies tend to be more knowledge-based. You talk about small groups. I mean, I'm doing a small group right now. It's been great. And I feel like there's more discipleship happening there than normally what happens in a Bible study, because Bible studies, you're asking a bunch of questions and you're going through the process. But that's all knowledge-based. That's all knowledge-based. So what exactly is discipleship, do you think? What is your interpretation of what discipleship is?
Yeah, boy, that's a loaded question. I'll tell you, it's a great question. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. Whenever I've done small group seminars or taught small group classes, I've done what Rick does. I've been an adjunct professor doing this, and I used to always start with just talking about discipleship, and then I'd all of a sudden get into all these questions like the one you're asking, because people had different interpretations depending on their experience, their background, on what discipleship is. And for some people, I was talking very organic, very relational stuff, and they were thinking very programmatic, like you have to do A, B, C, and that equals discipleship. And that was the furthest thing from what I was saying, right? So for me, again, I'm going to come back to it's a relationship on a relationship. And that's how the New Testament describes it. It's how the Old Testament describes it as well. So it's relationship on relationship that can happen within a Bible study. A Bible study can be a great format to get you toward where you want to go. And so can a lot of other things. But if it ends there, if all you do is gather together for an hour and a half on Tuesday nights and you open up your Bibles and you study Bibles, that's good. That's great. We should know more about the Bible. We should understand what the Bible says. That's all good, but discipleship doesn't end there. It moves forward as I grow in my relationship with Christ. I become more like him. I become more intimate with him. I grow to become not only like him, but that his life is flowing through me. In all kinds of ways. And I think you have to have Bible study, you have to have prayer, you have to have those things, those spiritual disciplines, both in groups and individually to help that to happen. But a lot of happens when I am in a relationship with somebody who I see that happening in their life and they help me move toward it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. It seems you're talking more of a more practical approach in terms of integrating with other people's lives as we, like you said, organically. I mean, we touch each other and through our communication, through our influence, whatnot. I think I get it.
Yeah. The problem is we have in churches for many years, we've set up programs assuming that the programs are going to make disciples. And I'm just saying that's an assumption we shouldn't be making. They can help. They certainly can help. And if you can find a program that is based on relationships, like real relationships, I think that's the way, that might be a way to go. But don't assume that just because you got the program now, that's what's going to happen. The other thing, the other part of your question that I wanted to kind of entertain a little bit is that Bible studies, the way they've been done over the last 50 years or more, have been very knowledge-based. The way they've been written, and so forth. I think if you look at Discovery Bible Studies, have you guys talked about Discovery Bible Study or any of that?
Oh, feel free. We're just now, this is our third week into the class, so a lot of those resources don't come up until later.
So Discovery Bible Study is a type of Bible study method that's used in countries all over the world, where and what is sometimes called the discipleship movement or the reproduction movement or whatever. And it's very simple. It's not a booklet. The study is all first of all, it's all very relational, but you basically ask the same questions week after week. I would just say, look up Discovery Bible Study and DBS and see what you find. And there are a variety of different methods of it as well out there. I'm actually using it in Christian Standard now in our Bible studies that we're putting together. So now that is a printed piece, which is kind of, it's kind of odd, but it's working for people who need that kind of a thing.
I'm gonna guess, Mike, that you're probably, just from listening to you, that the sermon studies where you have all the small groups follow whatever the preacher, that's probably not what you're talking about. I don't think I'm not saying you'd have a dim view of that, but maybe, for me, that's what you're saying is why I struggle with sermon studies, is because it's a one size fits all approach to small groups. Everybody studies the same questions. Everybody looks at the same text again. And it's not relationship upon relationship. It's relationship upon what the preacher has spoke, so
what I would do with something like that is if I was using that in a church, I think it could be utilized, but I would do the study differently than how it's usually done, where somebody listens to the sermon or maybe the pastor does it, and writes out 10 or 12 questions, which by the way is way too many. But that's usually what they do, 10 or 12, 15 questions. And then you sit down and you talk and they move from knowledge to application, which is all good. I just would do it differently, because what that trains people to do is to show up on Tuesday nights and participate in a Bible study. It doesn't train them to make disciples. It doesn't train them to serve other people. It doesn't train them to obey what God is telling them to do. So I would just adjust it to make sure that the way the questions are being asked, I'd ask far fewer questions for one thing, and I would focus on looking at the passage, reading it several times through, having different people read it, having somebody follow up with that and basically say, here's what I heard that passage saying. Maybe they just reiterate it, right? And then you just start talking about, what do you see in this passage? A couple questions that we always ask is, what do you learn about God? What do you learn about yourself? What do you see in this passage to obey? Or what do you learn about obedience? Some sort of obedience-based question. Then you get into the sort of, what are you going to do about it? And that should always deal with sharing your faith or serving, some outward flow from the study. So how are you going to share this with somebody who doesn't know Christ, for instance? Or what are you going to do this week to introduce somebody to Jesus based on this passage? Or how are you going to serve somebody this week? And it's got to be very practical. One of the last questions is always, so this week, this is what I'm going to do. And they have to say, I'm going to do something this week. You follow up with that the following week to see how everybody did.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically a discovery Bible study.
Yeah, that's good. A resource I like to use is the Serendipity model, Serendipity Bible, and they just do good. They write good questions and stuff as well, but they kind of have that same approach of getting you towards that application of the word. Well, let's switch gears here to another thought. I think we pretty much can come up with a lot of benefits from having a small group ministry. But what Mike, do you see as some of maybe the negative side effects when it comes to small groups that impact the church? Are there any negative side effects?
Well, it kind of goes back to, I guess, what I was saying before, when it's set up as a program. So we're going to get a whole bunch of people involved in small groups. So we're going to do a big party or whatever. We're going to do a big sermon-based kind of a deal for 6 weeks. And so out in the foyer, you can sign up for small groups. I hate that. Yeah. Sorry, but I hate that. It's so non-relational. It's
or worse, sign up on the connection card.
Sign up on the connection card, or go online and sign up. And I understand why that is. Here, what it comes down to is this: there's somebody in the church, the senior minister or whoever, who is basically saying, we need to get we love small groups. We believe in small groups. So let's get a whole bunch of people in small groups. And we want to get to X percentage of our people in small groups because they believe in it.
Yeah.
But that's the wrong way to do small groups. The better way of doing small groups is, from a discipleship standpoint, is I connect with Rick. And Rick and I start doing life together. And I start pouring my life into Rick over time. And we get together and we say, hey, Rick, let's invite some other people into this. Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. Well, who do you know? Who do I know? What's this going to be? What's the purpose of this thing? And then, so we invite some other people in, but when we invite them in, so first of all, I'm sharing leadership already with Rick. We find at least one or two other people who we're going to invite in who we think have the capacity for leadership very soon. Not like 5 years from now, but very soon. And we're going to start pouring ourselves into those people, and we're going to start meeting into a small group. And we're going to share leadership with those people from the very beginning. When I say share leadership, I mean more discipleship and shepherding, not necessarily leading the group itself, because anybody can lead the group, because we've made it very simple with this Discovery Bible Study stuff, right? So that's the way I would go about it. And then as we're pouring into people and they start sharing leadership, they're able to lead themselves. And we keep inviting new people inviting, not letting the church send us people. And we invite, and then we multiply, and then that multiplies, and then that multiplies. Yeah. If I was starting from scratch, that's how I would do it. Mm-hmm. But sometimes in the church world, we can't do that. So the best way to go is try to run parallel programs. One that's a discipleship base, and the other that's a multiplication based program, if you want to call it that. And the other one is an addition based, where people are signing up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's pause here and see if the gallery here has any questions you want to ask. Trevor, Philip, out there. Stephen, Jeff, Joseph, what do you got?
I would say, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead, Trevor. Sorry.
Trevor, you're up first.
Yeah. Thanks. When you consider like Saddleback, for example, with kind of, they have, mega church, but then they also have the small group approach. And then they, on campus, they have like the 101, 201, 301, 401 classes.
Right.
It kind of, that becomes like a hybrid in a way, to get the discipleship mixed with more of the intimacy. Do you find that that's a good asset as well in the ministry, to have something that kind of blends the two as a programmatic, like a processed discipleship program that is based off of a kind of a, class 1, 2, 3, 4, but then, well, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that for Saddleback, and I've worked with those guys quite a bit. So, I mean, I understand the whole, what they're doing. And that is, it's a very process oriented approach to doing small groups. And it works well for them. I think there are bonuses and, negatives to the way they do that. Part of the big picture of all of this is that each of these churches have a larger approach, if you will, to the way they are doing ministry. And, Saddlebacks is a very, come to church, bring your friends kind of an approach to church. It's one of the biggest mega churches out there, right? And that's their approach. It's get people to the weekend services and then filter them out into small groups. So that's the way, that's the larger system they're working in. What I just described is a system that's sort of contrary to that. But I think you could do both. Like I said, I would run 2 systems at the same time. And that's what I did at Northeast, which is a mega church here in Louisville. And it worked well, but I always wanted to put more emphasis on the natural, because I felt discipleship really happened better in that environment than that bigger environment where we got just people coming in. But that's not to say that the other thing didn't work at all. Like, people were growing in their faith and people were getting into really good community-based small groups. It's a part of it is deciding for that church, for that audience, what the best approach is, and then figuring it out on your own without just taking somebody else's system and trying to plug and play type of a thing into your church. That never works. Yeah. Well, it never works for very long.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is it similar to, like, contextualization, I guess, would be
that's a good word for it. I wish I would have thought of that word.
Well, like, now, not just with environment, but you also find that you might have to contextualize the approach based off of, like, even say, like, the political environments, like the cultural environments, because, like, I don't know, is there a time in, like as a nation or as, a community where one approach would be better because of just the heightened emotions, or maybe the vulnerability or something?
I would rather say it this way, that be very aware whenever you're doing any kind of ministry, be very aware of the culture in which you're ministering and take all of that into consideration, but be very careful not to over contextualize to everything, because the truth is still the truth. God's word is still God's word. Some things never change. And we have to be careful of not over contextualizing so that we lose those kinds of things.
Yeah. Philip, I think you had a question earlier. Did you want to jump in here?
Yeah. So my question was more focused on in terms of kind of dealing with conflicts when it does come to small groups. So I do know one specific small group now that one of my friends is a part of, and it has become exactly that small group that has become a clique, to the point where I do believe they're being discipled, and obviously the leadership is doing an amazing job, but it's more of like, in his efforts to want to see the group grow, people are kind of pushed away because they don't exactly fit into that mold for just pettiness, whatever reason, with young people there. And even he's a minister at his local church as well, but people have kind of commented with him kind of encouraging and pushing people to getting more involved with his small group rather than the things of the church. So it's kind of a tricky situation, as in, I guess my question would be more focused on if I was his pastor, right, and I see this behavior coming from the small group, I'm not necessarily in charge of the small group. Is it like, do I have a say? Like, should I say something in that sense? Or I guess, like, as a head pastor, how do you know when is the right time, and what do you say in situations like these?
Yeah, the more small groups that you have in a church, the more those kinds of things can, of course, come up. And so there always needs to be a system when you're developing a small groups in your church, to like, so coaching, and just people who can be overseeing and knowing sort of at least what's going on in the groups without being in control. I don't need to be in control of what my groups are doing. And I have to have a high amount of trust, but I also need to have some touches with them. Maybe not me personally, but somebody on my team who's working with them. And when we see something, we need to, talk to the leaders, and try to square this away. And that, sometimes that can be really hard, but there's always that accountability. I mean, again, read the New Testament and you'll see that there's those ties to leadership. That's why, elders were set up in the churches, and, to make sure some of those, that's why Paul wrote letters about some of the kinds of things you're talking about, even.
Yeah.
So, there needs to be communication. And I have had to ask leaders to step out. But that's not the first thing, of course, I did.
Yeah.
That would happen after several, communications with them about what we're doing on it, what we're trying to accomplish. Sometimes that once or twice that involved bringing our elders in as well, because we wanted to make sure that we were talking to, so the structure of the group has to come under the umbrella of the church's philosophies and everything else. And if they're not, we need to try to bring some alignment without bringing too much control.
Yeah.
I don't like telling groups what they have to study. I like to call leaders as shepherds and let them shepherd their group.
Yeah. They're actually the elder or the pastor, if you think about it. The group leader is.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones with the direct connection to their flock.
Yeah.
And if you look at each small group leader as a pastor or as an elder or as like your word shepherd, there a little bit more of a old school farm term. I mean, I think that makes sense, Mike. Where and I think I also empower small group leaders or group leaders. Let's not call them small. Let's just say group leaders. It empowers them to be able to meet the needs of their people. And sometimes that isn't doing the sermon alignment. Sometimes that isn't doing a prescribed study. And sometimes it is. It just depends on what the group wants and needs.
Yeah. And just remember, group life, like any kind of relational life, is messy. Sometimes read through the Gospels and just look at the messiness of Jesus' small group. And if his group was that messy, then our groups can be a little messy too. And sometimes he had to kind of be very direct with some of the people in his group. And sometimes we need to be as well.
Yeah. It's amazing to me that Jesus, who he selected, you think about Matthew, the tax collector, and Simon the zealot, they hated each other. If you understand cultural, they hated each other. A tax collector was the last person a zealot would want to hang around. In fact, they actually killed tax collectors, zealots did, because they were working for Rome. And Jesus put them together in the same group and said, come on, boys, let's have some fun together.
And a part of his purpose was unity.
Yeah.
So he brought people who were disunified together in order to bring unity.
Right.
Because unity is the only way that Jesus will know that we are his disciples. So imagine how much proof that was of the power of Jesus, that he was able to unify that group.
Yeah. Which is what
I have a
Paul talks
question.
about with reconciliation, right? We have
Yeah.
a ministry of reconciliation. To me, that's what a small group does, is we're constantly reconciling relationships.
Yeah.
And we're finding people that would never hang out together in real life, but they start to become friends. And before long, guess what? They're hanging out in real life.
Exactly. You got a question?
I have a question about that, actually, because I agree, and I wholeheartedly agree with the unity factor. And kind of the more we've hopped into this class, I feel like there's two things that I see are kind of two common things in our culture that would probably disunify, or people feel the less need for, and for a small group. And just in our Western culture of individualism, right? And kind of, you don't need community, or also too, like, don't tell me what to believe. And then also at the same time, you have kind of the negative connotation, I would say today, of sharing your faith, right? Like I deal with junior high and high schoolers, but to like tell them to share their faith, they're like, my friend's gonna disown me. Like, I can't tell them what to believe. I can't. So kind of those two big things of, it's kind of like a red flag to ever talk about your faith or invite someone into something that is deemed religious. And then we live in a Western culture that is individualist. You only need yourself. You don't need to be in community. What would you say are kind of, how do you combat those two huge things that can make people not be united, or kind of disunify?
So the gospel is in itself countercultural.
Mm-hmm.
The church should not be trying to fit into society. And part of discipling our people is helping them. This is where the one-on-one, this won't happen in a class or even on Sunday mornings in a great sermon, but people have to learn, and they have to see it. They have to see it in action, of people who are willing to to count the cost of being a disciple of Jesus. And part of the cost is that even though people are, may sort of be against it, like it's not part of our culture, but that we will share our faith with Jesus. I mean, that's part of who we are, isn't it? As Christians, as Christ followers, that we share our faith in him. And we have gotten so far away from that in the modern church, in a lot of places, because we're following culture more than following Jesus. We're following, the news anchor more than we're following the Holy Spirit. We're following what we see on Twitter more than our Father. And that's got to change. And we have to remind people all the time that what we're doing, the church itself, is countercultural.
Yeah. Yeah. With my group, Stephen, I work primarily with people who don't go to church. Half of my group do not go to church. In fact, we have one couple that went to Easter Sunday. It's the first time they'd ever gone to an Easter Sunday service last weekend in our group. And they're very close to being baptized and following Christ more fully. But, half of our group basically do not go to church. And what we do is I say, we want to invite your story into our story. And wherever you're at in your story, it's going to make our story better. And so, and when I think about culture today, we are constantly looking for community. Everywhere we go, we're looking, I just, as you were talking there, I was thinking, think about the game Survivor. It's all about tribes. Or you think about the old school 90s, Cheers, where everybody knows your name, or the other show Friends. I mean, where there was a collection of friends. Or, I even think of reality shows like The Deadliest Catch. I watch that and I get a lot of not just leadership insights, but also community insights, because these crab boats are basically little communities, and they fight for each other. They work with each other. They battle each other. We're hungry for that type of community. And I think we need to invite people into the story and our story. And, so it's not I'm going to tell you what you need to believe. It's, we're just going to live. And if you like what you see, keep coming.
Yeah, people hunger for the kind of community that they're seeing on shows like The Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
You know, what a great group of friends who always have, not always, but they have each other's backs, and you know, and stuff like that. I mean, that's a more modern show, although it's
I was
no
living
longer
in
modern now. But there's lots of shows. We started watching a brand new show. It's United States of Al, I think.
Yeah.
Have you seen that one yet? And so, but people sit at home on their couches watching other people do Community.
Yeah.
And I think that's the disconnect. Yeah, This Is Us is huge there. Yeah. Of course, that's a big family, but they've got this great support group. But I think the disconnect is that we watch people on TV having Community, and maybe our general society hungers for it themselves, but they don't know how to get it.
Right. Jeff, you haven't had a chance to jump in here. You got a question for Mike? Give you that opportunity.
I love his background.
Thank you. It's close. This is the Angels, though.
yeah, it's fine. I never found out where from.
It's all red, though. It's all red, though. Common theme.
That's fine.
Well, first, Mike, I just want to thank you for carving some time out to spend with us. Absolute honor to have you here. So very cool of you.
Brother.
And the question I have, you know, you're talking about relationship, and I'm a big relationship guy. I think relationships are the key to almost everything in life, whether it's, you know, leadership, work, family, you know, everything. And especially in small groups, you know, during this crazy time of COVID, I found that for those that are starting small groups in this Zoom environment, I feel like the relationship cycle, if you will, or the cycle to get more intimate with each other is extended out. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on, you know, I've heard a lot of thoughts on, well, this is the way it's going to be. I've heard thoughts of, no, everybody's going to rush back to big mega churches, and somewhere in the middle. So I'm just curious, like, what are you hearing out there as far as what people are longing for, desiring for, and how small groups going forward are going to look like once we come out of this chaotic pandemic time?
Yeah, we've actually in Christian Standard in our May-June issue talked exactly about the answer to your question there. Our publisher, Jerry Harris, wrote an article about it. We've got a guy who's a psychologist who's been writing about, and he wrote about the power of touch, that, you know, as we come back, you know, into in-person gatherings and then in-person small group gatherings as well, or maybe especially, that people are yearning for that touch. You know, we are people who need eye to eye, face to face, and not through Zoom. You know, we get some of it here, but it's just like a small bit of what it really is when you're face to face in real life with somebody. And I mean, we're creatures who need to hug. We need to touch each other. And so I think there will be a need for that. And I mean, I'm hoping for sooner rather than later, and are already sort of pushing into that. Some churches, some places, I mean, it all depends on where you are. You know, in Texas, I think you're fine face-to-face small groups without masks. In New York City, not so much. So it's, you know, in Boise, Idaho, I'm sure you guys are.
We had Easter Sunday services. Every row was packed. Nobody wore a mask.
Yeah,
I mean, it was before.
It all depends. And and we have a lot of our large churches who are still below 50%. We have others who are well above 70-75% now. And so it's really hard to say. The smaller churches came back sooner, but the larger churches now are coming back faster, it seems. So, you know, now how does that how does that work with small groups? I mean, here's what I would suggest to people is gather. Talk first, communicate about how you're going to gather. Are you going to wear masks? I support masks. I mean, if necessary, if everybody has had the COVID vaccine, you know, nobody's has a temperature, all that kind of stuff, you know, do with that what you will. But I think Zoom and other forms of communication like this will be used as a tool in the future. I hope it doesn't take place of in-person small groups. Do you guys agree with that?
I can, with my group, we have a hybrid, Mike.
Yeah.
We have the big screen with the Zoom group there. And we have a gal, actually, she's from my high school graduating class. She comes in from Montana every week. She Zooms in. But we have 3 or 4 older couples that, for whatever reason, they don't want to come to a live group yet.
So you have people Zooming into in-person groups, right?
Yeah. How does
that work?
That's awesome.
Well, I have my computer locked, go right into the TV. I just connect right into the TV. It's a really easy fix. And then I put my Zoom picture up there on the TV, and we have a conversation. The first thing I do when they come in is I put them in a breakout group. So I have them, you know, talking, and they have become their own small group, just like we would be. And my philosophy is with Zoom is in breakouts, no more than 4 screens. 3 to 4 screens is it. And so you just keep having breakout groups. But when we bring them back live, I'll do some teaching, and then I'll hit a button, and everybody will go off to their breakoff group to discuss in Zoom, where we in the live group will be having our conversation right there in the living room. And then I bring them back, and we continue. And we do our prayer group that way. We close with prayer and the Lord's Supper. We do the Lord's Supper all together, but we do our prayer group. About a half hour of our time is prayer group, where the breakout group, the Zoom group, is having their own prayer time in their breakout room.
Wow.
And it works.
It adds so many new dynamics that, you know, small groups are going to have to learn.
It's a skill.
Because, you know, we used to always, you know, I used to always teach the whole dynamics of, in a small group, you gather in a circle, not an oval, you know.
Yeah.
If you have a couch, try to have no more than 2 people on the couch, all these kind of rules so that everybody can see one another's faces and so forth. But the whole Zoom thing adds so many new dimensions to that. I wouldn't even know how to handle it, truthfully.
Yeah, it is a skill set, Mike. And one of the things interesting is I try to do that with this. You know, 2 years ago, we couldn't get anybody to come to Friday Zooms. I tried to do this 3 years ago, could never get anybody to come.
Right.
But we've had success. I think Zoom has actually kind of made it a little bit more, okay, I know what a Zoom is. I'm not afraid of it now, the technology. Yeah. And when you think about it, we're a small group right here, but we're on the edge. You know, if we're going to go into prayer time, it'd be better to split off into, you know, 2 different groups here. And I think the big mistake a lot of churches make, Mike, and this is what I saw during this last year, is they tried to have all the screens on the screen. And you want everybody's represented. Well, the more people you have, the smaller the screens get, and the less you see the people's faces. And what we want to see is people's faces. It's why I do a lot of digital virtual workshops, and my big pet peeve is when people don't turn on their camera, because I want to see you, right? You know, if I don't, you know, if your camera's off, I can't see you. Right?
Sorry.
Right, Stephen? Yeah.
Good job, Stephen. Good timing.
Touche. That's going to cost you, though. Let me see.
Just drop the letter grade.
Mike, we're cruising here towards the end, but let's, you know, you talked a little bit. I was going to actually ask you about COVID, what you thought. But I'm kind of curious. You have a long history in small groups and small group ministry. You know, and we're roughly the same age. So I go way back to the early 80s with small groups, and there've been a lot of changes. And even there's some patterns, you know, sometimes we go back and do some things we used to do, but what have you seen from the past that maybe we could borrow and, you know, turbocharge for the future?
So small groups started, I've done a big history, and I happen to I've had the pleasure of meeting and knowing quite well a couple of the what we might call the founders of the small group movement in the United States. And two of those guys are Lyman Coleman, who, Rick, you know, I'm sure.
Serendipity.
And Ralph Neighbor. And both these guys are a bit older now. They're still kicking. And they still have very strong opinions. But here's the thing. Small groups didn't start in the church the way we see them now. That all changed in the mid 80s. And so they started out on the fringe. They started meeting college campuses, and they were reaching lost people on college campuses. They were meeting in bars. They weren't meeting in church buildings, that's for sure. But they were out there to reach lost and hurting people. And when you talk to people like Ralph Neighbor and Lyman Coleman, they talk incessantly about lost and hurting people. And that's who small groups are for. And what happened is in the 80s, when the church growth movement kind of started full steam into churches, and when churches started sort of changing the way they did ministry to grow the church, to reach more people and get them into the church, what happened is they started seeing small groups as a great assimilation strategy, not an outreach strategy. And they started using small groups to assimilate people. And I think still today, that's the main way small groups are used. What I would like to see, and I've seen starting to change in several places, is seeing small groups again as an outreach strategy, which means we have to go outside of our comfort zones. We have to go outside of maybe where we normally meet, and we have to reach different kinds of people. And we could learn a lot from the way 12-step groups do their meetings, actually.
Celebrate recovery,
and all those kinds of things, to be able to reach people who really are hurting and need a community like ours, and especially a Christ-centered community. And Christ-centered community is a huge key to all of that. It's Christ at the center. All right, so that's where I think small groups may be going, and I hope they go in the next few years.
Yeah, I definitely see maybe even the church shifting. Did you hear about the church in Indiana, Mike? That church of about 3,000, and I don't think it was one of ours, by the way. I think it was another one, but it doesn't matter. But when COVID hit, they basically recruited small groups, and they moved their entire church into small groups in the neighborhoods. So, and then they just piped in the service to each one of these groups. So you would go to a house, and you would have your group there, but you would watch the service. You would watch you would worship together, and you'd take the Lord's Supper together, and you know, all that stuff was being done. And then you'd fellowship. And it was kind of interesting. And I've never heard anything since as far as that, but they did make that transition fairly early. And again, it was about the same size of churches where I go. So that's why it caught my attention.
Well, Northeast was doing that as well. And so, and several other churches that I know of. I'm thinking on a broader scale of some of our churches, including Southeast, you know, one of our largest churches, that are doing these discipleship type groups, using that Bible study method I was telling you about before. Now they're all doing it differently, but those are groups that are meant to be reaching people out on the fringes, and they're meant to multiply very, very quickly as well. So there is some of that happening, and it's all sort of still under the radar. But it's happening very well in a lot of countries south of the equator. That's where the church is growing in real ways.
Yeah, it's moving away from the north and the west to the south and the east.
Sure is.
Yeah.
And they're doing some exciting things, and some things that we would look at and go, ooh, that might scare us. But it's very biblical, a lot of stuff that they're doing.
Well, wasn't it, you know, the largest church in the world, at least at one time, was Cho's church over there in Korea, and
Yeah.
that was a house church.
Yeah. So they basically, their cells were their primary form of ministry, and their, what we would call our, you know, weekend services, they called their celebration service. And all that was is when all their cells gathered together to celebrate all that God was doing in the cells. So it's backwards to the way that we look at things.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that model. And that type of model has gone through a variety of different iterations over the over the years. But that cell model is another model of doing church, but it all starts in the cells, in the groups.
Yeah. Well, Trevor, Philip, Joseph, Jeff, Stephen, any final comments or thoughts you want to throw in here real briefly? I'll give you the last word.
I think you kind of tied it off perfectly well, because one of my questions, even before you had brought it up, is do you kind of see the Bible study / small groups kind of components eventually replacing like us physically meeting within a church building within the next few years or maybe next few decades? And you kind of mentioned it a little bit there, but I know it was brought up in one of the videos that we had watched this week. I think she was pretending more towards the Bible study groups instead of the small groups, but something that kind of like piqued my mind a bit in terms of the shift we are expecting to see within the church kind of post-COVID here. So it kind of does seem like a lot of churches will eventually make further steps towards kind of adapting more to that kind of group / Bible study setting, rather than focusing just on, you know, the Sunday services week to week.
Perhaps. I mean, the problem is that we're such a building centric society, and, you know, in order for something of true importance to happen, and I'm, you know, I don't really mean that, but that's the way our society thinks. It has to happen in some building somewhere, some special building. That's not true. That's not the way the New Testament operated. The New Testament church operated, of course. So there may be political ramifications of all of this in the future, may or may not. You know, people have been thinking something like that would happen, but they've been talking about it for 20, 30 years, and it hasn't happened yet. So I think the building, we're still stuck with buildings. We spend a lot of money on them. That's for sure.
I'm actually more concerned, Mike, about the generational issues, because if you look at most churches today in America, they're being held together by the boomer generation, which bounced back to church in the 80s and 90s. The whole megachurch movement was built on the back of a boomer generation. But when we look at the statistics on Gen X, you know, they didn't bounce back. There was a remnant that stayed through, like myself, obviously. But with the millennials, they're, you know, they left and didn't come back. And Gen Z is looking that way. They've left and they're not coming back. And so, in fact, Gen Z has the highest rate of atheism of any generation right now in America. Atheism. So, and I think probably half of them, because they're all kids, they don't have no idea what atheism really is. It's probably a cool thing to mark on a survey, probably, but still, the fact that they mark that should be a concern to us. And so that's the problem I see is it's not the building. You know, they got buildings in Europe and they're all empty, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's the biggest concern to me is once the baby boom generation, as it is now, starts to die off, who's going to replace?
We need some creative, on fire young people who will come up with ideas and practical ideas and put them into action to reach these younger generations, Rick. I mean,
yeah,
you know, it's anybody out there, I'll support you. I'll be right there because we can't lose our future generations.
Yeah.
I wonder if we actually have to go backwards. One of the biggest criticisms I've heard from younger generations is they read one thing or they hear one thing about Jesus, and then they see another in the church.
Right.
And I'm wondering if we need to go more practical and more into the streets and more into the neighborhoods and more into where people are and interact where they are than we are inside the buildings.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at the Catholic, I look at the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church seems to be a little more into that, you know, hands-on, but I think the rest of us need to get in there too. That's my thought.
That's Lyman Coleman and Ralph Neighbor would be jumping up and down right now at that.
And Rick Chromey too.
And Rick and Mike Mack. So it's I'm all for that. I mean, that's and we simply have to go back and read the New Testament. I mean, that's so New Testament, church. And you know, and we're losing right now, we're losing even more people. More people are questioning the church because we've had so many leaders make such poor decisions in their moral lives. And that hurts. That hurts the church every time it happens. And we can keep on saying, we're sorry, you know, that doesn't represent the church. But the more it happens, the more it does represent the church. And it saddens me.
I was having that comment. Sorry. Go ahead, Trevor.
Jump in.
All right.
We've got about 5 minutes, guys, and we're going to have to close up here.
Just curious on how, because I was kind of mentioning in the discussion boards, which obviously you're not part of, but I'm at a church right now where I was going to start going down the route of leading the small group ministry, but then my role got more specific towards the youth and family. But the church I'm at kind of underwent a division a few years back that was based off of small groups going AWOL and becoming factions, and then not having the alignment, you know, like the simple church, Thomas Rain type of church alignment thing. Right. And so I would ask, like, how would you be able to maintain that so that there would be that alignment? Like, is it just something where you have a small group coordinator that is fixated on making sure all the kind of the shepherds are in a row or type thing? Or
a small group coordinator, small group minister, pastor, whatever, who is in alignment with the elders and the senior minister, who and then flows out the ministry through, depending on the size of the church, but coaches or just other people, a team of people who are then helping lead the small group leaders. So there's always somebody shepherding somebody. I can't be, as the small groups minister, I can't be out there on my own without somebody shepherding me and pouring into me and holding me accountable. And I have to have the same thing with my leaders as well, to a certain extent, without controlling them. So it's giving them lots of the things they need. They need praise, they need help, they need support, they need resources, and they need some accountability, but they don't need me to tell them every step of the way to take. Is that what you're asking? Yeah.
I mean, I was just trying to think prevention.
You have to set up the system, and the hard part is for a small group minister, and I find myself fighting this all the time, is do I want to be running a system, or do I want to be just making sure my small group leaders are being cared for? Well, it's both and. Because I would find myself from time to time just running a system and looking at my flow chart, on a bulletin board somewhere, right, and making sure I had all the holes plugged and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I've totally forgotten about caring for my small group leaders. Yeah. And so I had to find the balance of doing all of those things well.
Yeah. Actually, a small group pastor is the pastor to the small group leaders, you know. And you just said a system, you got to have something in place to be able to reach, because the larger your groups get, the more those small groups you have. It's,
if you've got more than 10 or 12 groups, you can't do that yourself. I've seen people try. I mean, I had 150 small groups when I left Northeast, so I not only had coaches, but I had people over the coaches.
Right.
So
span of control suggests that you can only have adequate span of control over 6 to 8 people. So that's what I always operated from, 6 to 8. You know, once I had more than that, then I would get another person to help me, and we would divide the duties up, and they would have control. But span of control, 6 to 8.
Let me jump in with that there, because there's been systems set up like a 5x5 type system where every person only has 5 and all of that, or 6 to 8, what have you. But what I found is that can become cumbersome when your group ministry gets really large. So what I found some unique ways of doing this. I realized that I had small group leaders out there who we knew could be trusted. They've been leading small groups a long time. They should be coaching groups, or maybe they were coaching groups as well as leading their own group. They did not need a coach to coach them. Right. What they need, but they still needed span of care. So what I did is I gave them these prayer and encouragement partners. I called them, and they were older people in our church who didn't have many other things to do in ministry. And I asked them, will you take care of about 20, 25 leaders? But all you have to do is send them an email, maybe once a quarter or so, just to say, how you doing? Do you need anything? Can I let Mike know about anything going on in your group? And how can I pray for you? And they would just pray for him every week. And that's all they needed. In fact, they didn't want to be bothered. And that took care of a lot of my leaders. And then I just figured out my span of care depending on the leaders. Like some needed more than a 1-to-6 ratio. They needed 1-to-1. So we would give, like, brand new leaders or leaders who were in trouble, we'd give them 1-to-1.
Okay.
And others would get, you know, whatever they needed, basically. And we set up our whole system based on what the leaders needed, rather than just some broad system that was the same for everybody.
Yeah. Well, guys, this is why you want to stay to the very end. Sometimes the best stuff lands in the last 5 minutes. Wow, that was very helpful, and I think practical as well. But we are out of time. Mike, I want to say thank you again for joining us today. Thank you, Stephen and Jeff and Joseph and Philip and Trevor, for being a part of this. Next week, we're going to have Joseph Meyer, the author of The Search to Belong, joining us, and you're going to want to enjoy it. You'll enjoy that.
He's good, man.
Yeah.
Smart
Joseph,
guy.
Good. He's a friend of mine too. And you know, Mike, thank you again for taking the time to just serve Hope International University, as well as this class in particular. All right, guys.
Thank you, Rick.
See you online and next week.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, guys. Good to meet you all.
You too.
Nice
to meet you as well.
Thank you.